Twice a day, a two-lane road in western France disappears under 4 meters of salt water. Not a slipway, not a floodplain, a paved road with white center lines, road signs, a posted speed limit, and 4 kilometers of it laid across the floor of the Atlantic. Tow trucks pull cars off it every summer. The local fire station keeps a tide table on the wall. And every morning people drive onto it on purpose, because for 3 centuries this was the only way to reach the island of Noirmoutier without a boat. The strange part is not that the sea takes the road. The strange part is why anyone put a road here at all. The answer is not the one printed on the information boards at either end. It is not stubbornness, it is not poverty. And it is not that this was the shortest way across, because it wasn't. There is a gap between the island and the mainland, less than a kilometer wide, and for 300 years almost nobody used it. They used this instead. 4 kilometers of seabed, open for roughly 3 hours, twice a day, on a schedule written by the moon. To understand why, you have to stop thinking of this road as something people built. Nobody surveyed the line. Nobody chose it. The water drew it. Everyone who has lived here since has been arguing about whether to trust it. Noirmoutier lies off the Vendée coast, about 80 kilometers south of the mouth of the Loire, inside a shallow bay called the Baie de Bourgneuf. The island is long and thin, roughly 19 kilometers from tip to tip, and in one place, narrow enough to throw a stone across. Around 9,000 people live there through the winter. In August, the population multiplies by 10. The island's money has always come out of the ground, and the water salt raked from clay pans, oysters grown on the flats, and a small early potato that sells in Paris for more per kilo than most fish. The road that connects it to the mainland is called the Passage du Gois. It runs 4 and a bit kilometers from Beauvoir-sur-Mer on the mainland to the southern end of the island, and it is a real road. Asphalt curbs, passing places, a center line that vanishes under weed. At the eastern end there is a car park, a snack van in summer, and a signboard with today's 2 windows painted on a rotating dial. That dial is not a formality, because the timetable moves. Low water arrives about 50 minutes later each day, which means the 2 openings drift steadily across the clock over the course of a fortnight. A crossing that fell at 9 in the morning last week falls at lunchtime this week, and in the dark the week after. There is no fixed hour, no seasonal timetable, nothing a visitor can memorize. Islanders check the tide the way other people check the weather, out of habit, several times a day, and the tables are printed in the local paper and taped inside the doors of vans. The cargo explains why anyone bothered. For most of its working life, this road carried salt. The marshes behind Noirmoutier are shallow clay pans that turn seawater into crystal by evaporation, and salt was not a condiment in the 18th century. It was the only way to keep fish and meat through a winter. It moved by the wagon load. Later came the potatoes, planted in sandy soil under sea air and lifted by hand in May, which now sell in Paris at prices that make no sense to anyone who has not eaten one. Salt out grain and timber in, and every load of it crossing on a floor that is only there for part of the day. Outside those windows, the road is under the Atlantic. Not damp, not awash. Under 1.5 to 4 meters of moving green water, depending on the day, deep enough that fishing boats cross above it without knowing the road is there. Then the tide turns, the water drains off the flats, and over about 40 minutes the whole thing surfaces again, streaming black with seaweed, crawling with people carrying buckets and rakes. The rule is simple, and the margin is not. You can cross for about 90 minutes either side of low water. The French coastal system rates each tide with a coefficient from 20 to 120, and the bigger the number, the more violently the water moves, and the shorter your window becomes. On the strongest tides, the safe crossing shrinks to little more than an hour. There is no barrier, no gate comes down, nobody stops you. What there is, spaced along the road, are 9 rescue towers, Steel poles with a ladder welded up one side and a small platform at the top, high enough to keep a person's head above the highest water of the year. They are not decorative. They are used, most summers, several times, by people who parked halfway along to photograph the sunset and came back to find the way home gone. The surface makes it worse. 4 kilometers of stone that spends half its life underwater grows a coat of fine weed and silt, and on a wet day the grip is closer to ice than to tarmac. Cars slide, bicycles go down constantly, and the oyster beds on either side are staked out with sharp wooden posts, so the shoulder of the road is not a soft landing. The name says what it is. Gois comes from a local word for wading, for crossing with your feet in the water, which is what the passage was long before it was anything else. Not a road. A place where the bay was shallow enough to get across, if you were prepared to get wet, and if you left at the right hour, and if you did not stop. But none of that is the question. Slippery roads exist everywhere. Tides exist everywhere. The question is why a route like this was ever chosen, and it becomes much stranger the moment you look at a map of the bay. The obvious explanation is distance islands get their crossings at the narrowest point, because that is where a bridge is cheapest and a boat trip is shortest, and for a long time, that is what visitors assume they are looking at. It is wrong. The narrowest gap between Noirmoutier and mainland France is at the far southern tip of the island, at a place called Fromentine, and it is not 4 kilometers wide. The bridge that spans it today is 583 meters long. That is the shortest crossing by a factor of 7, and it was known to everyone for centuries. And for centuries they went the long way instead. That is the first thing that does not add up. There is a second. A road across a seabed should be the oldest thing here, worn in by 10,000 years of feet. It isn't. Go back far enough in the local records, and the Gois is not mentioned, because it was not there. Noirmoutier was an island reached by boat, and the crossing that people wrote about was a boat crossing. The passage only starts appearing on charts of this coast around the beginning of the 18th century, drawn by military surveyors mapping the approaches for the French crown. Before that, the ridge existed underwater, too deep to walk. The road did not become possible until the seabed rose to meet it. And it is still rising. The passage today is higher, wider and dry for longer than it was when the first cart crossed it. Whatever process created this thing did not stop. Think about what that means for the people who lived on either side of it. Not a route that was always there and gradually got improved, which is the normal story of a road. A route that arrived somewhere in the 17th or early 18th century, a crossing that had been an occasional waist-deep gamble at the very bottom of the tide, became something a horse could manage, and then something a loaded wagon could manage, and the relationship between an island and a country changed because the seabed had grown. Nobody voted for it. Nobody funded it. The bay handed it over. The third thing is the strangest, and it is happening right now. Since 1971, there has been a bridge, 2 lanes, free to use since the toll came off in the 90s, open in fog, open at midnight, open at every state of the tide, roughly 20 minutes away from the eastern end of the Gois. Every practical reason to use the tidal road ended the day that bridge opened. The traffic on the Gois did not fall. It rose. Hundreds of thousands of people a year now drive, walk and cycle a road that floods when a bridge is sitting right there. And the local authorities spend real money every year maintaining a route that has no transport function left. Watch the eastern car park an hour before a low tide in July, and the scale of it is obvious. Cars queued at the entrance with their engines off. People standing on the seawall with the dial behind them, waiting for a strip of black stone to rise out of the water like a submarine surfacing. When it clears, the queue moves, and for the next 2 hours the road carries more traffic than it ever did when it was a working link. None of it going anywhere. It could not reach more easily by bridge. The commune maintains the surface, replaces the markers, funds the rescue equipment, and staffs the response, for a route with no transport function left at all. So the easy answer collapses in three directions. It was not the shortest way. It was not the ancient way, and it is not, today, the necessary way. Which leaves the real question underneath. Not why people crossed here, but why there is anything here to cross. 4 kilometers of firm, walkable ground, running in an almost straight line across a bay that is soft mud on both sides of it. That does not happen by accident, and it does not happen anywhere else on this coast. The road is not a human decision at all, it is a byproduct, and the process that made it is the same process that drowns it twice a day. Start with the shape of the bay, because everything follows from the shape of the bay. The Baie de Bourgneuf is a shallow bowl, and Noirmoutier lies across its mouth like a bar across a doorway that leaves two ways into the north, the wide opening between the island's northern end and the mainland coast. To the south, the narrow channel at Fromentine, 2 doors into one room at opposite ends. Now bring in the tide. The Atlantic swell arrives along this coast from the northwest, and when the flood begins, it does not politely pick one entrance. It pours through both. One tongue of water sweeps south around the top of the island and into the bay. The other squeezes through the southern channel and runs north. 2 currents, entering a closed bay from opposite ends, moving towards each other. The volume involved is the part that gets underestimated. This stretch of the French Atlantic coast has a large tidal range, several meters between low and high water on an ordinary day, and considerably more on a spring tide. And the bay behind the island is broad and shallow. Filling and emptying a basin that size in 6 hours takes serious flow, and the water has only those 2 openings to do it through. That is why the currents at either end run so hard, and it is why the sediment load they carry is so heavy. They have to meet. And where they meet, they cancel. That is the whole mechanism, and it is worth being precise about what happens at that meeting line, because it is where the road comes from. Moving water carries sediment, not just silt in suspension, but sand grains rolling along the bottom, and the amount a current can carry depends steeply on its speed. Fast water holds a heavy load. Slow water drops it. When 2 flood currents run head-on into each other, the horizontal flow between them falls to nothing for a period around high water. Velocity goes to 0. Everything both currents were carrying comes out of the water column and settles in the same place on that same line, on every tide. Then the ebb begins and drains back out through both doors, and the pattern repeats twice a day, every day for thousands of years. The result is a submarine ridge, built grain by grain along the line where the 2 tides collide. Geologists call this kind of feature a bedload convergence, and it forms wherever tidal streams meet in a confined basin. In most places, it produces a bank that fishermen curse and shipping charts mark in red. Here, because the bay is shallow and the sediment supply is generous, the bank kept building upwards until its crest broke the surface of the low tide. It also explains something the maps make obvious, and nobody thinks to ask about why the thing is straight. Sandbanks in open water wander. They migrate downstream, break apart, reform somewhere else, and any chart of a tidal channel has to be redrawn every few decades to keep up. This ridge does not wander, because the line it sits on is not set by the sediment. It is set by the geometry of the bay and the timing of the tide, and neither of those has changed in any way that matters since the coastline took its present shape. Same 2 doors, same 2 flows, same meeting point, tide after tide, century after century. The deposit is pinned in place by physics, which is why a cart track laid out 300 years ago still runs exactly where it always did, while the sandbanks a few kilometers south have moved repeatedly. That is when the road became possible, not built exposed. A natural causeway, 4 kilometers long, aligned exactly along the tidal watershed of the bay, running from the mainland to the island, because that happens to be where the 2 currents shake hands. And now the useful part. The part that explains the human decision that has been sitting unanswered since the beginning of this. Because a ridge like that is not just walkable, it is the single most reliable piece of ground in the entire bay. Look at what the alternative actually was. The short crossing at Fromentine is short, and it is also a tidal channel, which means the entire volume of water filling and emptying the southern half of the bay has to squeeze through that gap twice a day. The current there runs hard. It shifts. The sandbanks in the channel move from year to year, and a boat that misjudges the stream gets pushed onto them. Crossing there meant a boat, a crew, a set of oars or a sail, a fair wind, and a willingness to gamble on all of it. Compare that with what the Gois offered a farmer in 1750. He could put a cart on it. He could drive cattle across it. He could carry a ton of salt in a wagon without loading and unloading it at two quaysides. And he could do it with no boat, no crew, no wind, and no fare. The crossing was long, but the schedule was published by the moon a year in advance and never varied. Once he knew the tide, he knew everything. There is a second half to that calculation, and it is about who owns the crossing. A boat crossing belongs to whoever owns the boat. Somebody sets the fare. Somebody decides whether today is a sailing day, and an island that depends on a ferry depends on a person. A causeway belongs to nobody. It opens on a schedule that cannot be bought, refused, raised in price or closed for the season, and it opens for a man with a wagon exactly as reliably as it opens for a man with money. For a community trading a bulk commodity out of a small island, that is not a minor detail. It is the whole business. That is the answer, and it is the opposite of what it looks like from the outside. They did not accept a dangerous route because they were desperate. They took the long way because the long way was the predictable one. 4 kilometers of ground you can walk beats 600 meters of water you have to sail. The sea drew a line across its own bay, and the people here read it correctly and used it for 300 years. The line kept growing while they used it. The same convergence that built the ridge went on adding to it, tide after tide, which is why the crossing window has lengthened over the centuries, and why the road is drier now than it was when the first surveyors put it on a chart. And there is a sting in the mechanism, which anyone who has been caught out here already understands. Because the water comes from both ends, the Gois does not flood the way people expect a road to flood. It is not a wave rolling in from one side, giving you a direction to run. Both currents rise at once, and the low sections go under first, while the crest is still dry. The middle can be swimming, while both ends look fine. People sitting on those rescue platforms are usually not there because they were slow. They are there because they were watching the wrong end of the road. The first hard evidence of the crossing comes from paper, not stone. Around the turn of the 18th century, a military engineer named Claude Masse surveyed this coastline for Louis XIV, producing detailed charts of the shoreline, the marshes and the approaches, and the passage across the bay appears in that generation of mapping. That gives us the earliest firm date before roughly 1700 silence. After it, a documented route. For the next century and a half, it stayed a track across mud, marked by nothing. Crossing at night was a matter of memory and nerve, and people got it wrong. In 1840, the first wooden markers went in along the line, and later the rescue poles, which tells you plainly how the previous arrangement had been working out. Surfacing came much later still. The road was properly consolidated and paved in the 1930s, which is to say that for something like 230 years of documented use, the main link to Noirmoutier was a strip of tidal seabed with sticks in it. The bridge changed everything, and it took a long time to arrive, partly because a fixed link was never a simple question here. A bridge ends an island. It brings the mainland's cars, its day trippers, its property prices, and its building companies, and it removes the one thing that had made Noirmoutier what it was, which was the fact that reaching it required a decision. Coastal communities across Europe have had the same argument in the same century. And it usually ends the same way, because the ambulance argument beats every other argument in the end. A tidal road cannot carry a heart attack at 2 in the morning. It opened in 1971, 583 meters of concrete across the southern channel at Fromentine, with a toll on it at first. From that day, the island had a permanent link, and the Gois had no job. The bridge carries the island's supermarket deliveries, its ambulances, and its winter commuters. The Gois carries its photographs. It also carries a running race. In 1986, someone had the idea of racing the tide directly, and the Passage du Gois was born. A race along the passage, started deliberately late, so that competitors run through rising water that is already over their ankles at the start and well up their legs by the finish. The winning time is under 15 minutes. Everyone else finishes wet. The tour had already been here once, in 1993, and got across without incident, which is probably why the organizers were relaxed about coming back. The most watched thing that ever happened on this road happened on the 4th of July 1999, on the second stage of the Tour de France. The organizers routed the race across the Gois, which meant nearly 200 professional cyclists on wet stone at 50 kilometers an hour, with a nervous first week behind them. There was a crash, a big one, and then a split in the field, and the riders behind it lost several minutes to the leaders in a single stretch of road. Among them was the Swiss rider Alex Zülle, who had come to that tour as a genuine contender. He lost around 6 minutes on the Gois. He finished the 3-week race second overall, 7 minutes and 37 seconds down. There is no way to prove a race is decided in one moment. But the arithmetic of that tour is not complicated, and it is the reason this road has a place in cycling folklore that has nothing to do with geology. The race came back in 2011, starting the opening stage right there on the passage at low water, with the crowd standing on the flats. The rest of the record is harder to pin down. Cars are lost here every year, and the tow operators keep count, and the fire service publishes rescue figures. Deaths are a different matter. There are drownings in the local record going back generations, and there are stories that get repeated with numbers attached that nobody can source. No one knows the true total. What is documented is steadier and more revealing the pattern of who gets caught. It is almost never the islanders. It is almost never the oyster farmers who are out on the flats every day and can read the water without looking at a clock. It is people from elsewhere, on holiday, who saw a road with a speed limit sign and assumed that a road with a speed limit sign is a road. There is one more group worth mentioning. Every time the passage surfaces, dozens of people walk out onto the flats beside it with rakes and buckets, digging for clams and cockles in the 2 hours of exposed seabed. They are locals mostly, and they work with their backs to the road and their eyes on the water, and they leave before anyone tells them to. The knowledge that keeps them alive is not written anywhere. It is the same knowledge that made this crossing usable in the first place, held in the same families, on the same schedule, for 300 years. Step back far enough, and what is left is a sequence with no author in it. The Atlantic pushes into a bay through 2 openings. The 2 flows meet in the middle and stop each other. What they were carrying falls to the bottom. Over some thousands of years that becomes a ridge, and the ridge grows until it clears the low tide. And the moment it does, a line appears between an island and a country. People find it. They walk it. Then they cart salt over it. Then they put sticks in it. Then they pave it. Then they build a bridge somewhere else and stop needing it altogether. And then they come back to it in their hundreds of thousands to watch the water take it away and give it back. There is a version of this coast where none of it happens. Move the island a few kilometers north, and the 2 flood currents meet somewhere else, over deeper water, and the ridge they build never reaches the surface. There is no causeway, no salt wagons, no rescue towers, no bicycle race, no cars on the back of a tow truck in August. Noirmoutier is simply an island you take a boat to until somebody builds the bridge, and nobody outside the Vendée has heard of it. The whole thing turns on a few meters of vertical accident. The road is still rising. The two currents still meet in the same place every day and still drop their load there. So the crest is a little higher each century and the window a little longer. Left alone for long enough, the Passage du Gois will stop flooding at all, and the island will simply stop being an island, and the whole strange arrangement will resolve itself into an ordinary piece of coast that nobody drives out to photograph. That is not going to be settled in our lifetime, and there is a rising sea in the other column of that calculation now, which may cancel the whole thing out. So the question at the beginning has an answer, and it is not really about the people. Nobody put a road there. The tide built a causeway, as a side effect of colliding with itself, held it just above the low water mark, and left it there for anyone who could read a tide table. The people simply agreed to the terms. 3 hours, twice a day, no exceptions, and no barrier to stop you finding that out for yourself.